now!
Hello, this is Billy Core from the Nostalgia Mall, and welcome to another episode of Nostalgia Mall Christmas 2018. Today we're going to be visiting the year 1991 by looking at that year's Sears Christmas Wishbook. Now, I was 2 years old that Christmas, so I remember that year very vividly with all the sarcasm I can muster. So let's go ahead and dive into the 1991 Sears Wishbook. As always, if you want to see this catalog in its entirety and in higher resolution, check out the link in the description. We're going to start off with this LXI camcorder from a time when camcorders came in all shapes and sizes. At this time, our family had a similarly sized camcorder, an RCA Pro Edit camcorder from 1989 that we bought new in 1990. They were very heavy, hard to carry, but at the same time, we loved them so much. At the top of this page is the VTech Video Painter, a somewhat popular toy in the early 90s that let you draw on your TV, much like the famous Mario Paint game on the Super Nintendo. I actually had one of these that I bought at a thrift store last year, and I hope to do a video about it sometime in the future. But the coolest item on this page is most certainly the GE television unit at the bottom right. This unit was a combination of a 9-inch color TV, AM/FM radio, and an audio cassette player. Now, I remember seeing these as prizes on game shows in the early 90s, such as Family Double Dare and Nick Arcade, and I've always been fascinated by them. I can imagine in the early 90s, anyone who owned one of these was one lucky person. I hope to find one of these someday to make a video of, but I imagine they are extremely hard to find now, unfortunately. Here's something you folks may remember. This is the Miracle Piano Teaching System, a piano that you could use with your NES. If you want to learn more about this, I recommend checking out the Angry Video Game Nerds video on NES accessories, especially if you're interested in shooting ducks with a piano. Yeah, that was a thing. Other than the very strange looking camcorder on the right, the item on the bottom right intrigues me. This is a Sony Video Walkman which can record to Video 8 cassettes. I've heard of these a few times, but I've never seen one this old before. I'm not sure what use these would have had, seeing that there weren't many commercial video releases, if any, on Video 8. I suppose this would have been a good way to review Video 8 recordings from camcorders back then, but other than that, I doubt many of these got much use. In the middle of this page is a Grand Prix driver toy, an item that was somewhat popular in the 80s. Basically, it was a children's driving simulator complete with a full dashboard. Now, there are many videos of these in action online, and I recommend checking them out if you want to see more about these. I've shown this before in other catalogs, but at the top right is the very famous Play School flashlight. Now, this was a toy I always enjoyed playing with as a kid, and I imagine many of you watching had one as well. I always found it cool that it had color filters to shine red and green. Again, this is a toy I would love to have again to keep in my retro toy collection. On the top left is the IQ computer, touted as a computer at an affordable price. This computer was mostly intended to be given to children and had features like a word processor, games, and built-in BASIC. Seeing as you could get computers like a Commodore 64 at a similar price that could do much more in 1991, the IQ computer was really unimpressive. If you want to see a video with all the information you ever needed to know about the IQ computer, I highly recommend the 8-Bit Guy's video about this computer. As with every other Christmas catalog of the time, many children's sleeping bags are featured here. I never had too many of these, but I always liked seeing these to see what kids were into at the time. I must say I really enjoyed the Tiny Toon Adventures, Garfield, and Bart Simpson sleeping bags featured here. Remember, this was when Bart Simpson was still ruling the world. Again, I've shown this before in previous catalog videos, but on the left is a Fisher-Price tape recorder, a toy I imagine a lot of kids had back then. I think I had one like this, but I think mine may have been a Mickey Mouse themed tape recorder. I've told this story before, but in the early 90s, before we had a family car of a built-in tape player, I would bring my Mickey Mouse tape recorder in the car to listen to tapes while riding in the car. So you pretty much had Hotel California by the Eagles coming out of Mickey Mouse. Thankfully, once we got a 1994 Honda Accord in August of 1994, I was finally able to listen to tapes like the rich people did. Before cell phones began to rule society, people enjoyed playing with walkie-talkies, some of them actually resembling the cell phones of the day. I think you'll agree that those Pepsi walkie-talkies have got to be the coolest looking walkie-talkies ever made. And can I say walkie-talkie anymore? I'll do it one more. Walkie-talkie, walkie-talkie. I've shown these a lot, but the piece of junk Tiger handheld games are making another appearance in this catalog. Joking aside, I actually did have a few of these back in the day before I even had a real game console. I think they amused me for only a few minutes for reasons you can probably imagine. Alright, here's the part you guys have probably been waiting for. Video games. This time we're starting off with the famous Nintendo Game Boy. Sadly, I missed out on the very original looking Game Boy as seen in this catalog, but I did become the proud owner of a red Game Boy Pocket in 1997, which I still own. What sticks out the most to me on this page is the weird looking accessory on the bottom left. Apparently it's a combination light and magnifier for the Game Boy, but if you ask me, it looks like a depressingly demoted Rob the Robot. On the left is the Atari Lynx, one of the two main competitors for the Nintendo Game Boy back in the day. I have never owned one of these, but I understand these were pretty interesting systems. I remember YouTube user Retro Man Cave about a year or so ago doing a whole series on restoring one of them, and even adding a modern day active matrix LCD screen to it. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. In fact, Retro Man Cave has a lot of really good videos on his channel, so again, check out his whole channel if you want some good entertainment. But anyway, I did own the system on the right though, the Sega Game Gear. I believe 1991 was the year the Game Gear first appeared in North America, so it's appropriate to be showing it here. While the screen might not be the best and the batteries never last long on it, I have very fond memories of the Game Gear. In fact, I still own mine that I got back in 1997, and yes, it still runs beautifully. Someday I would love to own the Game Gear TV tuner. I know its over-the-air capabilities are useless these days in our all-digital world, but I believe it does have a composite input, something of which I could have some fun with. This page features the TurboGrafx 16 from NEC and its companion items. I don't remember anyone having one of these new back in the day, but I understand the games on this system were very, very awesome. I think I may have played a couple on my RetroPie, but I really don't remember much about them. Also featured on this page are the Turbo Express, which was a portable handheld TurboGrafx 16, and the TurboGrafx CD, the CD add-on for the TurboGrafx 16. 1991 was a very good year for the Sega Genesis. This was the year Sonic the Hedgehog made his debut. I believe this was also the year the Sega Master System received a new case design, as you can see on the left. And no, I've never owned an actual Sega Master System, but I have emulated the games before, and they're pretty good. The NES was still holding on in 1991, as you can see on these two pages. And does anyone else think the Mario TV stand on the bottom left looks extremely awesome? And 1991 was the year that the Super Nintendo debuted in North America, as seen in this little ad showing some of the release titles, including Super Mario World, F-Zero, Pilot Wings, and SimCity, all great games. The Super Nintendo port of SimCity is actually my favorite version of that game because, well, the music and atmosphere of that game just feels so nice. And I do intend to do a Let's Play of that game sometime. Moving away from the video games, here are some Little Tikes outdoor equipment. As a kid, I always wanted one of those plastic playhouses like the one at the top left. Sadly, I never got to have one, but seeing as I have my own office now as an adult, I think things eventually work themselves out. What I did have, though, was the Little Tikes Play Center as seen on the second from the bottom right. I would spend hours outside playing on that thing. I believe I got mine in early 1993 and got many years of fun out of it. I see two items on this page that I had as a kid. On the top right is the famous Little Tikes Cozy Coupe, which I actually got for my birthday in 1991. I drove that thing to death until I was about 7 years old when I finally outgrew it. I also had a few other variants of it as a kid, and I even had a miniature version of the Cozy Coupe, which was something of which I'd like to add to my retro toy collection someday. This page also features the Little Tikes Tractor, which I've mentioned before in previous videos. Now, this was a toy that was very fun to drive around the house, and I even got to drive it in my grandmother's large basement. which was a whole lot of fun. You can also see the attachable garden cart in this picture, which I always wanted to have on my tractor. My dad and I went to every toy store in Greensboro and Winston-Salem, but it was just impossible to find, so I never got to own one. Poor me. I always have to show this off when I get the chance. On the far right is the red Power Wheels Jeep that I had growing up. I got mine at Toys R Us in the early part of 1994 and put many, many miles on it throughout the years. Now here's something I've always wanted to own, an old-fashioned gumball machine. The main thing that's kept me from owning one is the fact they are horrifically expensive, though the big one on the left seems to have only been $20 surprisingly. Also, I have to say the gumball machine with the built-in telephone on the bottom left is incredible. In the middle of this page is the AT&T Mickey Mouse telephone, which my grandmother gave me for Christmas in 1991 straight from the Montgomery Ward at Carolina Circle Mall. I still own it, though my dad is currently using it as his main telephone at the moment. Hopefully I can pass it down to my children someday. Also, I have always wanted to find one of those cool-looking Garfield telephones as seen on the bottom right of the page. At the top of this page is the AT&T cordless telephone, the exact same model we had growing up. It's amazing how revolutionary they were back then and how archaic they are now. Even more incredible is the fact that this was being sold for $140 back then. Now these aren't your normal everyday word processors. These word processors were also semi-computers, complete with a monitor and floppy drive. I believe some of these were even MS-DOS compatible. Now UXW Bill has a video about one of these, though I can't remember if he had any on this page or not, but I do highly recommend you checking that video out if you can find it. Finally, we make it to the computers. On the left we find an IBM PS1, IBM's first entry into the home computer market after the failed PC Junior in the mid-80s. Similar to the PS2 line of computers, the PS1 computers featured very proprietary designs. The one in this ad features a 10 MHz 286 processor, 1 MB of RAM, and a 30 MB hard drive. I have never owned a PS1 nor have seen one in person, but there are many videos here on YouTube of these computers in action. On the right is a computer from my beloved Packard Bell company, the Packard Bell Legend 600X. This Packard Bell features a 20 MHz 386 processor with 1 MB of RAM. Here we find another Packard Bell on the top left. This is the Packard Bell Legend 6 Plus, featuring a 16 MHz 386 processor and a 40 MB hard drive. Now, I have actually never owned a Packard Bell this old before. The oldest Packard Bell I've owned is from around 1994 or so. I must say, though, that these older ones, as seen in this catalog, were not the most reliable computers in the world, which is surprising coming from me. On the right side of this page are two very famous computers from Commodore, the Amiga 500 and the Commodore 64C. I have never owned either of these computers, and despite how cool they are, my vintage computer interests mainly lie with IBM compatible PCs, although if I were to have the opportunity to own either of these computers, I'd definitely take it. I also find it interesting how cheap the Commodore 64 is being sold for in this catalog, with a mere $150 price tag. I believe this was at the end of the Commodore 64's life, so that would definitely explain the low price tag. Here's a page featuring some computer software including Windows 3.0, which would be succeeded by Windows 3.1 a few months later in early 1992. Also seen at the bottom right is the famous Disney Sound Source. I mentioned these earlier, but here are some more camcorders. The RCA camcorder on the bottom right is a newer version of the RCA camcorder my family had back then. It still amazes me how the functionality of all these camcorders can now be done a million times better on tiny little smartphones now. On the top right of this page is the Hitachi video printer. Now, I've never owned one, but these came in handy back in the day for taking still shots from VHS tapes made on camcorders. But with a $1,000 price tag, I doubt many normal people had these. Also on the bottom right is one of the many flavors of VHS rewinders that were available back then. Now let's check out some TVs. On this page is a 52-inch projection screen TV. I still vividly remember when projection screens were the most wonderful TVs you could own. I always considered these the kind of TVs that only rich people owned back in the day. But in retrospect, these TVs really weren't that amazing. The picture was always dark and blurry if you ask me. Back then, you were much better off with a standard CRT. I've actually seen projection screen TVs outside of my local Habitat Restore thrift store before, being given away for free because they're so worthless now. 1991 was on the tail end of the wood grain console TV era. I still remember us having an 80s model in our living room until the mid-90s when we finally upgraded to a regular one. It's hard to imagine, but car CD players actually did exist in 1991 as seen on this page. We didn't own a CD player until 1997, and we didn't own a car CD player until 1999. Heck, in 1991, our family car didn't even have a cassette player. Okay, that concludes our look at the 1991 Sears Christmas Wishbook. I hope this brought back some fond memories, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Until next time, this is Billy Core, signing off. Thank you for visiting the Nostalgia Mall. If you liked what you saw, please like, subscribe, and follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also support me on Patreon if you would like. The links to all of these are down below. Until next time, this is Billy Core wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.